Aloha mai kako, Michael Kiola Tengan, the urban age, enlivening the magic within. Welcome to today, the renewed day 2 of our 21-day immersive experience. The Genius Lab experience, again, is going to be going on for the next 3 weeks. And so we're going to be taking it week by week, this week focusing upon essentially what is known as your personal brand, an identity, if you will. And so the thing about that is that we often kind of confuse the roles that we occupy with the person that we are. And there's a difference, right? Myself as a father and as a husband, myself as a consultant, as a community advocate, all of these things are roles that I occupy. And yet, when we come into a place of self identity, who am I? What we want to do is actually really shift that question into a statement into who I am. And so, what we're going to be talking about today is something known as spheres of influence. I like to think more of that, dimensional, three-dimensional, rather than just a 2D example. And so, when we talk about these spheres of influence, we're talking about first and foremost who I am at the core of who I am, right? Then going out a little bit further into the roles that I occupy and taking that when we talk about these spheres of influence, we're really talking about relationship. And so my relationship to myself, for example, is then reflected in my relationship to those who are closest to me, my family and my friends. Then also in those that I work with, for example, as well as those that I connect to from the perspective of community. And so these spheres of influence go essentially 4 levels deep. And so there is first and foremost my intra-personal relationship. Now that's my relationship to myself. How is it that I am most, irrespective of the roles that I occupy, what are the qualities and characteristics of my beingness? Okay. Next is my interpersonal relationships. So my relationship to Alicia, my wife, to our children, Pohaku and Makani, my mother, my father, so on and so forth. My really, close friends and those within my inner circle. From there, then, if you have the intrapersonal relationship, kind of like I'm not sure if it's the best example, but I think of a drumstick. Those ice cream cones back in the day, I used to love those. There's the inside, and maybe the inside of the drumstick is a big ball of fudge, right? And say that's my essence, if you will, my beingness. Around that is the vanilla ice cream. Okay. Now that's the area that's connected to, say, my interpersonal relationships. Now on that thin candy shell, if you will, of chocolate is going to be my professional relationships. So those work relationships that are outside of the home that are related to where I am being of service in the world. And say the nuts and the sprinkles and whatever else is on that candy shell are my community relationships, right? And so those are maybe a little more sparse, however, really just as important. This could be those in the community associations that I belong to, the organizations that I'm a part of. And so all of these levels and relationships are things that are constantly a part of my life. And so the thing about it is that we tend to focus our attention so far outside of ourselves, right? We tend to focus our attention upon those community, professional, sometimes at the detriment of friends and family, and more commonly of ourselves. Now, the thing about that is that if the integrity of our self is compromised, then everything else collapses, right? If there's a big chunk of fudge in the middle of that drumstick and all of a sudden it disappears, then there's a puka, there's a hole inside. And so the ice cream, as it begins to melt, begins to slowly implode, essentially, upon itself, as the weight of every bite, for example, continues to push down, 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 and it kind of collapses inward. And more often than not, that's what we see, right? We see people dealing with stress and anxiety, lack of sleep, health issues, so on and so forth, because the integrity of our self is compromised as our attention and indeed our identity is based so far on the stuff outside, right? Again, you put same example, we have that drumstick, we have it the fudge on the inside, the ice cream on the outside, the candy shell, and then all of the little nuts and toppings. Now, if we're so focused upon ourselves in respect to the community, and you kind of think of this as a political figure, for example, all of that is there, right? All of that is there. The chunks and chunks and chunks. And instead of just having a few sparsely spread, it is just caked and covered, right? Now, professionally, then those relationships may also be a part of it as well. So there's really a thick candy shell, if you will. Family and friends, those closest to us, may still be somewhat intact. However, the inside is no longer there. And so, where that big chunk of fudge was all of a sudden gone, everything slowly will begin to collapse in upon itself. And so, what we want to really look at then, as we explore this week in particular, as we establish a new, renewed vision and version of ourselves, we want to really start off with that aspect that is deep within inside of ourselves. Now, the thing about that is as we look at that, the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, the professional, and the community relationships that we have in our lives, we want to also look at how is it that we're spending that time? Do there's 168 hours in the week. We take, the 6 to 8 hours of sleep that we have, which still leaves a good 2/3 of our week in waking hours. Now, how do we spend that time? Is a big question, because if we're spending that time so focused on the outside without spending a whole lot of either quality or quantity on really our relationship with ourself, the whole concept of self-care, for example, introspection, reflection, all of these things help us to continue to fortify and increase the integrity of our interpersonal relationship, or my relationship to me. Now, as that happens, though, that strength, that integrity, as it builds, then everything else is built upon that, expands, if you will. From that is an extension of it. And so, as we look at that, how do we spend our time? Intrapersonal, interpersonal, professional, and finally, community. Then we have a better idea of where the large and lion's share of our energy is going to. So what we're going to be working with on this week is generally what's known as a time allocation sheet. I'm going to attach a link to it to our comment section down below. And what I want you to really look at is you'll see there's going to be a number of blocks, generally 6 blocks. Each block has 4 hours per block. Now, as you look at those different blocks, then what I want you to do is sort of lay out, generally speaking, how you spend your day, the activities, because those are really going to be a result of our intention, because we're doing it, the activities in each of those blocks. So say, for example, block 1, right? We have block 1, which is, 12 to 4 a.m. Ideally, you're sleeping. Perhaps you're not, but you're right, whatever it is, that's the dominant activity in that block, sleep. Say, for example, block 3, which is from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. Say, for example, part of that is waking up, getting to work, so on and so forth. However it is that you go through all of that in terms of your morning, then just list out the dominant activities. Now, once you have those dominant activities listed, then what we're going to do is actually just process it and identify it as either being an interpersonal, interpersonal, professional, or community-based activity. And in that way, we'll be able to better identify how you're spending time now and how it is that we can begin to create some shifts in that dynamic to more ably give to yourself and to balance these energies out. Okay, that's it for now. We'll be coming back to this because this is really going to be a theme as we go through the next 3 weeks in terms of how do you spend your time and how can we continue to intentionally focus on inspired action, that which most feels fulfilling for ourselves. That's it for now, though. Love and aloha to you all. Take care of each other, and ahui ho.